The notion that Ukraine is losing is also flat out false. If Russia could conquer Ukraine militarily, it would have already done so by now. Putin cannot achieve its goals on battlefield, so he will try to negotiate his way there. To secure the best outcome for Ukraine and Europe, we have to stay the course but pick up the pace. This means more sanctions to deprive Russia of the means to fight and more military and financial support to Ukraine.
So what they are doing now is they're really sort of polishing the details of a potential multinational force to be deployed in Ukraine after a ceasefire is reached. Whether there's going to be a deployment of forces, whether Russia is going to accept that, it seems highly unlikely. So this is a very crucial point because it relates really to the so-called security guarantees. You know, what kind of guarantees that Ukraine have that Russia is not going to attack again. And this is very closely linked also to the question of the strength of the Ukrainian armed forces. Because a lot of what the Europeans and the coalition of the willing have been saying is that the main line of defense are the Ukrainian armed forces themselves. So I think there's going to be a lot of reluctance among Europeans to reduce the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, you know, to an extent that it becomes very hard then for those who are providing the security guarantees to act effectively. There are a few points that still really need to be ironed out, and these are probably the most difficult ones, the hardest ones. And we start with the question of territories. Is Russia going to accept the current sort of line of confrontation, the line of control, which nevertheless is, in many areas, is sort of a gray zone. But Russia wants to acquire territory as a result of negotiations, and the Ukrainians are probably going to be very reluctant to do that. So that's a big point. The second point is, if there is a ceasefire, who is going to monitor it? How is it going to be enforced? What is the distance between the lines? What kind of weaponry can be, deployed or not deployed? Is there a demilitarized zone? And who is going to monitor it? That is also essential. And of course, the additional question, as I mentioned, is the question of the security guarantees, the role of NATO forces and NATO more generally, and also the size of the Ukrainian armed forces. So I think there are a lot of elements still there where we don't see yet that all sides are going to be able to compromise. And I really think that the Russians are going to keep pushing and see how much they get, because they think that they are sort of on the winning side. And the problem is that they have sort of convinced elements of the Trump administration who are currently negotiating that, that there is very little chance for Ukraine to sort of become, or have the upper hand on the ground. And that, I think, is very serious, because if we really look at the realities on the ground, the Russians are advancing extremely slowly. They still have not taken Pokrovsk after over, 2 or 3 years that they've been trying to. They have a lot of difficulties. So have the Ukrainians. But I think it would be a mistake to argue that the Russians are sort of entirely in a dominant military position. They also face a lot of challenges at home in terms of their economic capabilities, and the sanctions have an impact, and we'll see what happens now if the Americans fully enforce sanctions around, two big oil companies. So a lot will depend on what, the Russians like to call the correlation of forces. And in that respect, Europeans have a very important role to play, because they have to show that they're providing ongoing support to Ukraine, that they're not wavering, and that is real, it's serious. The Poles, for example, Poland is very much on the front lines to the extent that it's a neighbor not only of Ukraine but also Belarus. And the Russians have deployed nuclear weapons not only in Belarus but also in Kaliningrad, which is also on the borders with Poland. So these are countries that are not going to be ready to just allow for Russia to take the upper hand in these talks.